My name is Claire Delaney. I'm 32, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one everyone counted on. Organized, responsible, the problem solver. I built a life on reliability, on showing up, on doing the right thing, until the day I realized my family didn't want me there. It started the moment I stepped out of the rental car in my mother's driveway. The wind tugged at my black coat, the same one I wore to court when I made partner, and my heels clicked across the gravel like they didn't belong in the softness of grief. I had flown in from Chicago that morning, canceled meetings, postponed deadlines, called in favors for the last-minute ticket. Because of course I would. Because I always did. But when I walked into the funeral home, something was off. It was subtle at first, how Aunt Diane looked surprised to see me, how my cousin Mason shifted uncomfortably when I hugged him. My sister Leah didn't meet my eyes, and when I tried to sit in the front pew, where daughters sit, where I belonged, someone I didn't recognize placed a soft hand on my shoulder and said, "Family's sitting up front." "I am family," I said, more stunned than angry. She offered an apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Leah said immediate only. I froze. For a moment, I thought maybe she didn't recognize me. Maybe there was a mistake. But then I saw it. The row of Delaneys. Leah, her husband, our two brothers, their wives. A space where I should have been. Empty. Reserved for a ghost. So I sat in the back, next to a man from Mom's church who nodded politely and handed me a tissue I didn't ask for. I couldn't even cry. I felt like a stranger at my own mother's funeral, like someone had rewritten my place in this family while I was gone. Or maybe they never meant to give me one at all. The service passed in a blur, soft music, words about eternal peace, about the kind of woman my mother was. People nodded as if they knew her. I didn't hear half of it. I kept looking at Leah, at how tightly she held our brother Sam's hand, how she leaned her head on his shoulder during the eulogy. I'd barely heard from her since Mom got sick. Every update came secondhand or not at all. I assumed she was overwhelmed, that she didn't mean to shut me out. But now, sitting in the back like a forgotten guest, I wasn't so sure. Then the lawyer stood up. I only half registered what he said until I heard my name. "There's a letter addressed to Claire. Her mother left it with specific instructions to be read aloud, publicly, at this moment." A collective murmur swept through the room. Heads turned. I could feel every eye on me as I sat frozen, fingers clenched around the edge of the pew. Leah's face was unreadable. The lawyer cleared his throat and unfolded the paper. "Claire," he read, voice steady and unfamiliar, "if you're hearing this, it means you came. I wasn't sure you would. I want to start by saying I'm sorry. For the silence, for the distance, for everything I never told you but should have, and for what you're about to hear." My mouth went dry. "I know you think you were doing the right thing. Always. You were. You've always been my most capable child, my most dependable, the one who never needed anything, and that, my darling girl, is why you were the one I failed the most." There was a sharp inhale somewhere to my left. Maybe me, maybe Leah. The letter continued. "You've spent your whole life earning a seat at a table that should have been yours without question. You believed love came from performance, that being useful was the same as being wanted. But it isn't. I let you believe that. I let your siblings believe it too. I made you into the glue and then blamed you when things didn't stick." My hands were shaking now. I didn't want to hear this. Not like this, not here. I know what they think of you. That you left, that you chose your career, that you make everything about you. But they don't know how many nights you called me, how many plane tickets you bought and never used because I told you not to come. I told them I didn't want to bother you. I lied. The words hit me like glass shattering in slow motion. I stared at my sister, willing her to look at me. She wouldn't. "I kept you away, Claire, because I was ashamed of needing you, because you made everything seem so easy, and I didn't want you to see how much I was falling apart. You were my mirror, and I couldn't face myself." The lawyer's voice cracked slightly as he reached the end. "You deserved more than we gave you, and I pray you won't let our silence become your shame. Please forgive me. Live loudly. Don't let them forget who you are." He folded the letter. Silence followed, heavy and raw. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then someone, maybe Leah, stood up and walked out. And just like that, I realized the truth. I had spent a lifetime being exactly who they needed, and it had cost me everything. The room didn't breathe after the letter was read. It pulsed with discomfort, unease, and that thick, humid tension of something unspoken being dragged into the light. People didn't know where to look. A few stared at their laps. Others glanced at me, like I might stand up and scream or fall to pieces. I did neither. I sat still, spine straight, hands folded in my lap like a statue of a well-mannered daughter. Leah was gone. Vanished before the lawyer even finished folding the letter. She didn't wait. Didn't turn around. I should have gone after her. Maybe. But my legs wouldn't move. I stared at the polished wood of the casket and tried to understand what had just happened. What had really happened. Mom had kept me out on purpose. All those times she said, "Don't worry about me." All the updates I had to drag out of Leah in clipped texts. The nights I sat in my office trying to book a flight while she insisted it wasn't necessary. She knew I wanted to come, and she chose to keep me away. For years, I thought the distance between us was a symptom of me leaving, of building a life out of state, of prioritizing work, of being the too much daughter, too ambitious, too opinionated, too sharp around the edges. I wore that guilt like a second skin, let it soak into every choice I made myself smaller, quieter on holidays, sent checks instead of showing up because I thought that's what they preferred. Now I realized I hadn't been avoiding them. They'd been keeping me out, and the worst part, they didn't even hide it anymore. Outside the chapel, the sky was an overcast gray that seemed to flatten the entire world. I stood under the awning while people filtered out. Most avoided eye contact. A few nodded sympathetically, lips pulled into polite, unsure smiles, as if they didn't know whether to offer condolences or congratulations. After all, I'd just been publicly absolved by a dead woman. That made me... what, exactly? Sam finally approached, hands deep in his coat pockets. "Claire," he said, his voice low and guarded. I looked at him, my older brother, the one who used to carry me on his shoulders when we went hiking, who bought me my first journal when I was 10 because I had too many thoughts not to write them down. His eyes were tight, unreadable. "You okay?" he asked. I almost laughed. "Am I okay? Is that a serious question?" He winced, just slightly, and looked away. I didn't know about the letter. Didn't know it existed, or didn't know what was in it? A pause. Both. I wanted to believe him. Maybe I even did. But belief didn't untangle the knot in my chest. "Where's Leah?" I asked. "Went to the car, I think. She was pretty upset." "She was upset?" His mouth pressed into a line. "It was a shock. To all of us." "No," I said, voice sharper than I intended. The shock was being told to sit in the back row at my mother's funeral. The shock was realizing I wasn't welcome. You're all just dealing with the aftermath of getting caught. He flinched like I'd slapped him. I didn't care. We stood there, the silence growing heavy between us. A car pulled out of the lot. Another idled, with its hazard lights blinking. I wrapped my arms around myself and waited for the cold to seep in and numb everything. "She did keep things from us," Sam said finally. "I'm not saying that makes it right, but it wasn't all us. You were gone a long time. I called. I texted. I came when I could. I know, I'm not blaming you. But you still let them treat me like an outsider." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know what you want me to say." I shook my head. "Nothing. I need to find Leah. It didn't take long. I spotted her across the lot, leaning against the passenger side of her SUV, arms crossed tight across her chest. Her face was red, but she wasn't crying. Leah never cried when you expected her to. She saw me coming, but didn't move. "I didn't know what was in the letter," she said flatly. "But you knew there was one?" Her jaw clenched. "She gave it to Mr. Burnett a month ago, said it was for the service. I asked her if she wanted me to read it, and she said no, that it was private until it wasn't." "Then why did you make me sit in the back?" Leah's eyes flicked up. "Because I was angry." "About what?" "About everything, Claire." Her voice cracked, and she stepped forward. "About you being gone. About you swooping in with your big city job and your perfect clothes and acting like we're all doing life wrong. Mom never said anything bad about you, but she didn't have to. You were her favorite. We all knew it." That hit like a punch. "You think I was her favorite?" "She adored you. Even when she was sick, she'd brag about you to her friends. Showed everyone that article they wrote about your firm. And when we asked if she wanted to call you, she'd say, 'Oh, I don't want to bother Claire. She's so busy,' like the rest of us weren't." "She was lying," I whispered. "To all of us." Leah swallowed hard. "I know that now, but it doesn't make it easier." We stood there, sisters separated by decades of miscommunication and misunderstood silence, and for the first time in years, we didn't have anything left to hide behind. "I wasn't trying to be better than anyone," I said. "I just thought if I did everything right, I'd earn a place. That if I worked hard enough, no one would notice I didn't really fit." Leah's face softened. "You did fit, just differently." I didn't know what that meant. Maybe she didn't either, but it was a start. The wind picked up, lifting a few dead leaves across the pavement. I looked down at my heels, then up at my sister. "I'm not going back to Chicago tonight." She nodded slowly. "Okay." We stood there in silence, two daughters finally mourning the same mother, for different reasons, maybe, but with the same ache behind our ribs. Later that night, I found myself in Mom's kitchen, still wearing my funeral clothes. The heels were off, though. I'd kicked them into the corner by the door the moment I walked in, my feet aching from standing too long on unstable ground. The house was quiet, too quiet, like it was trying to pretend it didn't remember the woman who once filled every room. The kettle whistled lowly on the stove, and I turned it off before it got too loud, as if even that might break the uneasy truce the day had drawn between us all. Leah had gone home. Sam and Mason had made vague promises to talk soon. I didn't press. I'd learned something today about forced closeness. It only breeds more silence. But I needed to be here. I needed to stand in this house that raised me, that remembered versions of me even I didn't recognize anymore. I carried my mug of tea into the living room and sank into Mom's favorite chair. Her blanket was still draped over the back, like she might return to it any second. The lamp beside me flickered when I turned it on. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. There were photos along the mantel. I hadn't noticed them earlier, not when I passed through this house like a stranger trying not to bump into anything. Now, in the quiet, I saw them clearly. Leah at prom, Sam holding his first daughter, a group picture from a family reunion I'd missed the summer after my first promotion, and then finally a photo of me, fifth from the left, half obscured behind a vase of fake sunflowers. A graduation shot from college. No frame, just stuck there behind the others like an afterthought. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for the anger to rise again. But it didn't. Instead, I thought of Mom's letter. Her voice in my head, softer than I remembered it. "You believed love came from performance. That being useful was the same as being wanted." She was right. I had believed that. I still did, if I was being honest. It was easier to earn affection than ask for it.
Easier to be helpful than vulnerable. I set my tea down and wandered through the house. Each room was a memory minefield. The hallway smelled faintly of her lotion, lavender, and something chemical. I opened the door to her bedroom with a hesitation that surprised me. It felt like trespassing. But she wasn't here anymore, and maybe I needed to see what she left behind. The room was tidy, almost staged. Someone had clearly come through and made it nice for after the funeral. Probably Leah. Still, there were signs of her here. Stacked paperbacks by the bed, her knitting basket with the unfinished scarf she'd been working on last fall, the oxygen tank in the corner, already disconnected and forgotten. I sat on the edge of her bed and looked around. What was I hoping to find? Another letter? A diary that explained everything? A last-ditch apology for a lifetime of almosts? Instead, I found the jewelry box. It was tucked in the top drawer of her dresser. Wooden, hand-painted. I recognized it from when I was a kid, used to sneak in here and run my fingers along its smooth lid, wondering what treasures were inside. Inside were the usual things: earrings in mismatched pairs, a string of pearls that had lost its clasp, 2 old brooches that smelled faintly of mothballs. And beneath it all, folded in 3 like a secret, was a page torn from one of her journals. I knew her handwriting instantly, angular and rushed, as if she always thought faster than she could write. Claire, I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to say these things aloud, but I want you to know I do see you. I always have. You were never hard to love. You were just easy to rely on. When you were little, you used to ask me, "Am I doing it right?" Like everything in life had a single perfect answer. And when I said yes, your face would light up like you'd passed a test. It broke my heart, Claire, because love isn't a test, and somehow I made you think it was. I know I made mistakes. I see them clearer now than I ever did in the moment. But you always tried, even when I pushed you away. I hope someday you'll understand that it wasn't because I didn't want you near. It was because I couldn't face the guilt of needing you so badly when you already gave so much. Please don't let our mess define you. You're more than what we did or didn't give you. You always have been. I'm proud of you. I love you. I'm sorry. The words blurred behind a film of tears I hadn't realized were coming. I folded the page and held it to my chest, letting the weight of it settle inside me like an anchor I didn't know I needed. Mom had been imperfect. So had I. So had all of us. But for the first time, I saw the cracks not as betrayals, but as proof of how hard we'd all been trying. Desperately, clumsily, often in the wrong ways. A memory surfaced then, one I hadn't thought of in years. I was 13, crying in the bathroom because Leah had called me a robot during an argument. I'd been trying to organize the kitchen drawers, something I thought would help. Mom had found me with my back against the tub, hugging my knees. I was just trying to make things easier, I'd said, and she'd crouched down beside me, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "I know, sweetheart," she'd whispered, "but not everything can be fixed." Back then, I thought she meant drawers. Now I knew better. In the stillness of her room, I let out a breath I'd been holding for years. Not everything could be fixed, but maybe some things could be understood. And maybe that was enough for now. I tucked the letter back into the jewelry box. Tomorrow, I would talk to Leah again. Tomorrow, I would start going through the house, one room at a time, not because it needed organizing, but because I needed to understand what was left. Tonight, I'd sleep in my mother's bed. Not to replace her, not to grieve perfectly, but just to be here, to exist in the space she once held, with all the contradictions and complexities we never figured out. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own family. Morning in Mom's house came in quiet waves, sunlight pressing through the slats in the blinds, the faint creak of wood adjusting to warmth, the soft hum of a fridge too old to run silently. I woke with her pillow beneath my head and a sense of disorientation that lingered longer than sleep usually allowed. I didn't belong in this bed, and yet I didn't want to leave it either. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I dreamed of her. Not the version from the hospital, gaunt and gray. She was younger in the dream, vibrant and laughing at something I couldn't hear. She wore that ridiculous denim apron she always used to bake in, dusted with flour and thyme. She looked at me, said nothing, but nodded, as if to say, "You're going to be okay." I wasn't sure that I was. By the time I made it to the kitchen, the tea from last night was cold, still sitting on the table. I sipped it anyway, out of habit more than anything. I wandered through the house again, slower this time and more deliberate. I opened closets, ran my fingers along picture frames, stopped in front of the hallway mirror, and barely recognized myself. Without a calendar to rule me or a city to rush back to, I looked younger. Or maybe just more tired, more real. Around 10, Leah called. "I thought I'd stop by," she said. Her voice was clipped, not unfriendly, but guarded. "I figured we should talk, about the house and everything." I told her to come. An hour later, she arrived holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the same sweater she used to steal from me in high school. We sat at the kitchen table, and for a minute, we just sipped in silence. "I found another letter," I said quietly, when I couldn't take the stillness anymore. Leah blinked. "Another?" I nodded and handed it to her. I'd reread it 3 times that morning and felt every word carve something open in me. Letting Leah read it felt dangerous, but also necessary. She read slowly, no expression. When she finished, she folded it carefully and slid it back across the table. "Guess she had more to say to you than the rest of us," she muttered, and my stomach tightened. "That's not what it meant!" I didn't say it was. But she had, not in words, in tone, in the heaviness that filled the room now, like a pressure drop before a storm. I took a breath. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." She stared at me, wary. "Okay. Did you and Sam... Was it just that I moved away, or was there more? Why did I always feel like I had to prove myself just to be included?" She didn't answer right away. She looked down at her coffee like maybe the swirl of cream might show her the past more clearly. "You weren't here," she said finally. "That was part of it. But also, you were always so together. And Mom, she used you as the benchmark, even when she didn't mean to. When things got messy, she'd say things like, 'Claire would have handled this,' or 'Claire never would have let this happen.' After a while, it stopped sounding like praise and started feeling like a comparison. That hit harder than I expected. I didn't know she said those things. I don't think she knew what she was doing, but it made us feel small. Or maybe just invisible next to you." I swallowed hard. "I was trying to help. I know you were, but you helped from a distance. And when people are drowning, Claire, they don't want a lifeguard on the shore with a whistle. They want someone in the water with them." That hurt, because it was true. I thought I was helping, sending money, organizing care from afar, managing logistics like grief was a project to solve. I'd convinced myself that being efficient was the same thing as being there. "I didn't know how to be in the water," I admitted. "I didn't know if you wanted me there." Leah softened just a little. "We didn't. Not at first. But then we did. And by then, it was hard to say so without sounding like we blamed you." "Did you blame me?" She didn't look away this time. "Sometimes, but mostly I blamed Mom." That surprised me. "Why?" "For making everything a secret, for managing us like we were fragile, breakable things. She thought keeping the peace meant keeping things hidden, that if she kept feeding us these little versions of the truth, we'd stay whole. But all it did was make us feel lied to." I nodded slowly. "She did it to me too. Even the good things she felt about me, she kept hidden. Like she thought saying them out loud might ruin them." "She did love you," Leah said. And it didn't sound bitter this time. "She talked about you all the time. She just didn't want to need you." That line echoed something from the letter.
I couldn't face the guilt of needing you so badly when you already gave so much. I finally understood it. Mom had mistaken dependence for burden. And in protecting herself from that shame, she shut me out. We're all a little broken, aren't we? I said quietly. Leah snorted. We're Delaney's. It's our birthright. I laughed. And for the first time since I arrived, the sound didn't feel out of place in this house. We spent the next few hours cleaning, slowly, sorting through paperwork, boxing up old clothes for donation, setting aside a few things we weren't ready to let go of. There was something healing in the rhythm of it, even when we didn't speak, even when grief snagged on unexpected objects, an old calendar with Mom's notes in the margins, a lipstick she hadn't worn in years, a recipe scrawled on the back of a bill envelope. By the end of the day, Leah looked at me as she stood at the door, keys in hand. We're going to need to go through the attic soon, she said. I nodded. We will. Together. A pause. Then, stay for a while, okay? I smiled. I'm not going anywhere. As she drove off, I stood on the porch and watched the last bit of light slide behind the trees. The house was still full of ghosts, but they weren't angry anymore, just quiet, waiting, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to be with them. The attic stairs groaned like they remembered secrets. It was 2 days later, and Leah and I had finally mustered the energy to face it. Our mother's final frontier of storage and sentiment, a place that had always been off-limits growing up. I don't know if it was because she didn't want us touching the past, or because she knew how easily it would cut us open. Maybe both. Leah went up first, her flashlight beam bouncing over low-hung beams and half-labeled boxes. I followed, pulling my sleeves over my hands to push away the dust that clung to every surface like memory's fingerprints. It smelled like paper and old wood, the kind of smell that makes your heart ache without understanding why. You good? Leah asked, glancing back at me over her shoulder. Yeah, I said, though the pounding in my chest begged to differ. We began with the boxes closest to the stairs. Christmas, taxes, 2001-2010, dad stuff. Leah handled that one delicately, setting it aside without opening it. We hadn't talked about him much. He died when I was 17, she was 20, and that loss created an unspoken fracture in our house. He'd been quiet, gentle, a shadow of a man in the last few years of his life, swallowed by illness and sadness. Mom kept his memory, like she kept everything else, folded up and packed away. Here, Leah said, pulling a lid off a long, flat box. Photos. I moved beside her. Black and white Polaroids. A few curled 90s snapshots with the dates printed along the borders. And then, beneath those, something more curious. A small leather-bound notebook. Mom's handwriting marked the first page in looping cursive. Things I can't say out loud. Leah looked at me. You read it. I think it's for you. I opened it carefully, the spine cracking like it hadn't been touched in years. The first entry was dated the year I moved to Chicago. Claire left today. I told her I was proud. I didn't tell her my chest cracked open watching her walk through that gate. She looked so much like me when I was young, eager, polished, pretending not to be terrified. I miss her already. But I'll tell her I'm fine. I always do. I turned the page. Leah doesn't ask for as much, but she needs so badly to feel chosen. I wish I knew how to give her that without making Claire feel like she has to earn it. I stopped. My throat tightened. These weren't just thoughts. They were confessions. Not meant for the world. Maybe not even meant for us. But they were here now. Undeniable. I looked up at Leah, unsure. She shook her head. Keep going. And so I did. Entry after entry, years of quiet truths spilled across those pages. Some about us, some about herself, some about fear, about how she hated crying in front of us, how she struggled to ask for help,
how she felt she'd failed Dad in the end too. Then one short line caught me. I was hardest on Claire because I thought she could take it. There it was. The weight of a lifetime delivered in 10 words. I read it again, then again. I wasn't imagining it, I said quietly. She was harder on me. Leah didn't argue. I saw it too, but I always thought it was because she trusted you more, like she knew you wouldn't fall apart. That's not trust, that's expectation. We sat in silence, the kind of silence you sit in when the truth is still echoing. Then Leah picked up a photo from the pile beside us. You remember this? I looked closer. It was the two of us, probably ages 6 and 9, sitting in the back of Dad's old station wagon, popsicles in hand, faces streaked with sun and sugar. She made us pose for like 10 minutes in that heat, Leah said. I remember thinking she was crazy. I remember thinking she just wanted proof we were happy. Leah's laugh was brittle. Isn't that what she always wanted? A photo she could point to say, see, everything's fine. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on top of it. She was afraid of our sadness. Leah looked over at me, her eyes softer now. You're not. It took me a second to realize what she meant, and when I did, I smiled. Just a little. No, I said. I'm not. We spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through more boxes, sometimes talking, sometimes not. We found old art projects, a stack of letters Dad had written during their early marriage, Mom's wedding dress folded into a garment bag with one broken zipper. Time bent strangely in the attic. By the time we climbed back down, the sun had started to dip behind the trees again. I kept the journal. Leah didn't argue. In fact, she handed it to me herself, like she understood I wasn't taking it to own it, but to carry it until we both figured out what to do with the truth inside it. Downstairs, we sat at the kitchen table again. There were 2 beers between us now instead of coffee. The exhaustion was bone deep, but so was the calm. I'm sorry, Leah said quietly, for how things were, for not asking more questions, for not pushing harder to understand you. I'm sorry too, I replied, for assuming I had to prove myself all the time, for not seeing how that made you feel small. She gave a tired laugh. We're all experts at hiding what we actually feel, I nodded. But maybe we're done with that now. She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she lifted her bottle toward mine. To saying things out loud. I tapped mine against hers. To letting each other in. That night, I read more of the journal, not all at once. I paced myself, like peeling layers from something too delicate to rush. Each entry was a step closer to the woman I thought I'd known, and to the family I'd somehow been a part of and outside of all at once.
She hadn't written about being perfect. She wrote about being scared, being tired, wanting to be more. And in those pages, I saw myself, flawed, reaching, trying so hard to love the right way. Maybe that was the beginning of something new. Not repair. Not yet. But recognition. And that was more than we'd had in years. The days after the attic blurred into one another. Quiet mornings, slow afternoons, dinners Leah and I ate on mismatched plates without saying much. We were learning each other all over again, cautiously, like children relearning the shape of a once familiar home after a storm had blown through. I stayed in Mom's house, slept in her bed, then gradually transitioned into the guest room I used to visit once a year during holidays. At night, I read more of the journal. I didn't devour it like a novel. I sipped it, sentence by sentence, letting her words rewire the parts of me that had long stopped hoping for clarity. It was a week after the funeral when Mason called. "You've been here a while," he said. "You planning on staying?" I could tell it wasn't just curiosity. It was a warning disguised as a question. Mason had always been the peacemaker, but he liked things tidy, controlled. My presence in this town, in this house, was not part of the clean arc he had planned after Mom's death. "For a little while," I said. "Leah and I are going through the estate." He paused. "She said you found a journal?" I closed my eyes. "Yes." "And you're reading it?" "Yes." Another pause. "Is it about us?" I didn't know how to answer that. "It's about her, and herself, and all the ways she didn't know how to love out loud." Mason let out a low sigh. "I think some of us would rather let the past lie. That's what got us here in the first place." He didn't argue, just said, "Well, don't stir up more than you're ready to hold." Then he hung up. I stared at the phone long after the call ended. It was strange how people could spend years avoiding the truth, then treat it like poison when someone else touched it. Mason wasn't angry, not exactly, but he was afraid. They all were. The journal didn't just hold Mom's secrets. It cracked open the entire family's unspoken history. That afternoon, I found Leah in the backyard, pulling weeds from the garden bed that had once held wild strawberries and overgrown daisies. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hands dirty, her face flushed with focus. "She used to keep a notebook out here," she said without looking up. "Wrote down what she planted each year. I used to think it was boring, but now I kind of miss the way she'd talk about soil like it was a person." I knelt beside her, the sun hot on the back of my neck. "She wrote to understand things. That's what I've realized. She wrote because she couldn't say it out loud." Leah glanced over. "Like you?" I hesitated. "Yeah, like me." We worked in silence after that. There was comfort in the doing. Something about digging into the earth made everything feel a little more real, a little less weightless. After a while, Leah sat back on her heels and wiped her hands on her jeans. "She wrote about Dad in the notebook?" "She did?" "She never talked about him much after he died, like saying his name might bring him back broken." I nodded. "She said she stopped looking at his side of the bed because it made her feel guilty for still sleeping in hers." Leah swallowed. "She loved him. I knew that, but I didn't know she grieved him like that." "She grieved a lot of things," I said softly. Leah looked at me for a long moment, then asked, "Do you think we did too?" It wasn't really a question. We both knew the answer. We had grieved in fragments, in silence, in sarcasm. In the distance we let grow between us. We hadn't cried together when Dad died. We hadn't held each other when Mom got sick. We survived grief by splitting it up into manageable pieces and carrying them alone. "I don't want to do that anymore," I said. "Me neither." Later that evening, Leah suggested inviting Sam over. She didn't say why. She didn't have to. Something had shifted between us, and she wanted to see if it could ripple outward. When he arrived, he looked more tired than usual, less buttoned up. He brought a bottle of red wine and a lemon cake from the local bakery Mom used to love. We sat at the table again, always the kitchen table, where everything important seemed to happen. "I heard from Mason," Sam said. "He said you're making discoveries." I smiled. "He makes it sound like I'm on a treasure hunt." "Are you?" I thought about that. "Maybe, but it's not gold I'm digging for." Sam poured the wine. "What is it then?" "Understanding," I said. "Forgiveness. Maybe both." He nodded slowly. "I could use a little of that." We talked long into the evening, about the past, about Mom, about the weird, quiet ways she loved us, how she packed lunches with notes for Leah, but never gave them to me because she thought I'd think they were juvenile, how she sat in the hallway outside my room the night before I moved to Chicago but never knocked, how she left Sam voicemail messages she never sent. "She wasn't cruel," Sam said, "but she was scared of being seen too clearly." "She saw all of us," I said. "She just didn't know how to show it without feeling like she owed us a reason." Leah nodded. "Maybe that's why we've spent our lives thinking love had to be earned." We all went quiet after that. Not because we were out of things to say, but because sometimes silence is the most honest response. At one point, Sam looked at me and said, "You're not the outsider, Claire. You never were." I smiled. Maybe not, but I didn't know that until now. That night I lay awake for hours, the hum of the house wrapping around me like breath. The grief wasn't gone, but it had changed shape. It no longer pressed on my chest like a hand holding me back. It moved like a shadow beside me, quiet, present, but no longer in control. I opened the journal again. On the last page, in faint pencil, Mom had written one line: "We are never as far apart as we think we are." I touched the words with my fingertips, not to erase them, but to remember. I woke to the sound of birds outside the window, early, insistent, and wild, like they didn't know grief lived here. Morning light filtered through the curtains in long slants, cutting the room into slices of warmth and shadow. For a few moments, I didn't move, just listened. It was the first morning I didn't feel the weight of my mother's absence as something clawing at the edge of my chest. It was still there, but it had softened. Later, as I made coffee, I found myself humming. It startled me, honestly. I couldn't remember the last time a sound came out of me without purpose. Leah wandered in just after 8, bleary-eyed, wearing one of Mom's old sweatshirts. She reached for a mug without saying anything, but her smile told me everything I needed to know. We'd found some kind of rhythm. Not a perfect one, but enough. We didn't talk about the will or the paperwork that morning. We didn't even talk about the journal. We just existed. Sisters for once, not competing for space in a home that had too often made us feel like guests. It wasn't until the afternoon, after she left to take her daughter to piano lessons, that I found myself drawn back to the small linen closet in the hallway. There were old sheets in there, musty and unused, some boxes of photos I hadn't opened yet, and, wedged behind a stack of board games, a battered manila folder. Inside, surprisingly intact despite the years, were pages of writing, typed, some single-spaced, some hand-corrected in red pen. I recognized my mother's voice instantly. They weren't journal entries. They were essays, personal reflections, stories. The first was titled, "The Daughter I Didn't Know How to Love Out Loud." I sat down on the hallway floor, folder in my lap, knees drawn up. The words jumped from the page with brutal clarity. Claire was born on a Tuesday. I remember because I was supposed to teach a community center class that night. I had written up a lesson plan. That tells you everything you need to know about the version of me that became her mother. Scheduled, prepared, bracing for the world like it might test me at any moment. She came out screaming, full of fury and fight, her hands clenched. She was perfect. But I saw myself in her instantly, and not the good parts. I saw the same sharp eyes, the same unwillingness to ask for help, the same refusal to cry for what we needed. I loved her fiercely, but I feared I would ruin her with my approval, that if I praised her too much, she would come to expect it. So instead, I measured my affection, made her prove she could withstand the quiet, and she did, too well. I made her think love was a reward. My eyes blurred. I stopped reading for a moment, my fingers gripping the page like it might fly away. Then I kept going. She was 13 when her father died. I remember watching her go quiet at the funeral. She didn't cry, not once, just stood at the edge of the service with her jaw locked, like she'd swallowed the whole ocean and didn't want to spill a drop. That night, I heard her crying through the wall. I didn't go to her. I wanted to, but I didn't. Because I thought if she saw me cry too, it would make her pain heavier. I was wrong. That's the thing they don't tell you about motherhood. Sometimes your silence wounds more deeply than your mistakes. I thought I was protecting her. I was only making her think she had to carry it all alone. I put the essay down and leaned my head back against the wall. My heart was racing, not with anger, not with grief, but with a kind of reluctant relief. To read her admitting it, not to me, not even in a letter, but in her own private writing, meant something deeper than a simple apology. It was self-awareness. It was change, even if it came too late to show me in person. The doorbell rang. It startled me. I tucked the essay under my arm and answered the door, still barefoot. It was Nora Hart, my old high school English teacher turned family friend, and possibly the only adult back then who seemed to see through the armor I wore like skin. "I was in the area," she said, holding a brown bag with the bakery's logo on it. "And I heard you were still in town." We hadn't spoken in years, but I hugged her anyway. We sat at the kitchen table, and I showed her the essay. She read in silence. When she finished, she tapped the paper gently. "She had a gift," Nora said. "I always thought she was a little afraid of her own voice." "She was afraid of being known," I said, "even by me." Nora looked at me kindly. "That fear runs deep in your family." I nodded. "I see that now." She took a sip of tea. "You know, she once brought one of your essays to my classroom. You were in 8th grade. She didn't show it to me, just held it and said, 'She doesn't know how to feel things unless she writes them first.' Then she left. That was it." I blinked. "She never told me that." "I don't think she knew how," Nora said. "She loved you in the way she understood, but she didn't understand you. Not until later." I looked down at my hands. What do I do with all of this? The journal, the essays, the pieces of her no one else saw? Nora smiled. "You do what she couldn't. You tell the story, and you let people see you in it." We sat a while longer. She told me stories about my mother I'd never heard. How she organized a fundraiser in secret for a neighbor with cancer. How she wrote letters to widows in the community because she knew what it meant to feel left behind. She wasn't warm in the traditional sense, but she cared in quiet, relentless ways. After Nora left, I opened the folder again. The next essay was about Leah, another about Sam, then one simply titled, "The Spaces We Leave Behind." Each one read like a map, leading me somewhere I hadn't known I needed to go, not just to forgiveness, but to understanding, not just of her, of myself. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was restless or grieving, but because I was finally awake in a way I hadn't been in years. The kind of alertness that comes not from caffeine or fear, but from the soul cracking open, like something inside me had shifted, quietly, and now the world looked tilted and full of sharp, sudden color. I lay on the living room couch with the folder open across my stomach, reading the essays under the soft lamplight, each one like a whispered version of my mother I'd never met while she was alive. There was something haunting about seeing her in these words, not as my mother, but as a woman who had wanted more, who had settled, who had feared and failed and tried again, who had loved us, all of us, but never learned how to make it feel like enough. The essay titled "The Spaces We Leave Behind" gutted me. I think I spent so much time organizing the house, labeling drawers, building a world of clean surfaces and polite conversation, because I couldn't face the disorder inside me. If everything outside looked tidy, no one would ask about the mess underneath. I didn't realize until later that Claire had inherited that same instinct, order as armor. She perfected it, actually. Better than me. She turned it into a life. But sometimes I wonder, does she know that neatness isn't love? Does she think approval is affection? She needs someone who lets her be messy, someone who doesn't flinch when she breaks apart. I wish I had been brave enough to be that person. I folded the page and held it to my chest. I hadn't cried yet, not fully, but now I did. Not out of anger or sadness, not even for her. I cried for the girl I used to be, for the years I spent trying to keep everything together so no one would see how terrified I was of not being enough, of not being wanted if I wasn't useful. I cried because I was tired, and because for the first time, I was allowed to be. When I woke, the house was quiet again. That gentle, reverent quiet of a place where truth had finally been spoken. I made coffee and stepped out onto the porch barefoot, the folder still in my hands. I didn't know what to do with all these essays, but I knew I couldn't keep them locked in this house. They weren't confessions anymore. They were bridges. And maybe that was what my mother had meant them to be all along. Leah came by around noon. She looked lighter, like she'd slept well for the first time since the funeral. She brought groceries and her youngest daughter, Hazel, who immediately crawled into my lap and asked if she could help me read the papers. I laughed. Maybe in a few years, sweetheart. Leah gave me a look over Hazel's head. You seem different today. I am, I said. Or maybe I just finally see myself clearly. She waited, letting the silence open between us. I spent so much of my life being what everyone needed. Predictable, composed, responsible. I made it a job. I wore it like a costume, I said, my voice low. But I didn't realize it wasn't just for you. It was for me. To survive. Leah sat across from me. Mom saw it. I know. And she didn't always know what to do with it. She didn't know what to do with herself most of the time, Leah said softly. But she tried. That's what I keep coming back to. She tried, Claire. I know she did, I said. And I think she left me these pages because she didn't want me to go through life still believing I had to earn love. Leah reached for my hand. You don't. You never did. It was the first time she'd ever said it, and maybe the first time I'd been ready to hear it. That night, I drove to the high school. I sat in the empty parking lot and watched the sun sink behind the bleachers, casting the field in gold and shadow. This was where I'd spent every fall Friday night as a teenager, cheering from the sidelines, straight-A report cards in my backpack, my emotions packed away like seasonal clothing. I had played the role of Golden Girl so well, no one ever thought to ask if it hurt. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken of the essays. I hadn't told Mason yet. I hadn't told Sam everything either. But I would. Not to start a war, not to prove anything, but because they deserved to see our mother clearly too. Not the version they kept in photographs, not the one who made perfect mashed potatoes and controlled every holiday, but the flawed, brilliant, scared woman who had left us all pieces of herself in the hope we'd put them together when she couldn't. I started writing that night. Not an essay, not a letter, but a story about a girl who always tried to be what everyone needed, about a woman who never learned how to ask for help, about a family that got it wrong and kept trying anyway, about grief, not as a wall, but as a doorway. The words came easier than I expected, not because it wasn't painful, but because for the first time I wasn't writing to impress anyone. I wasn't writing to prove I was smart or good or worth reading. I was writing because I didn't want the truth to go back into the attic. I wanted it to live, to breathe, to mean something. I sent the draft to Nora before bed, just a few pages, a beginning. She replied at midnight, "It's honest. Let it be messy. Keep going." And I would, not because it would fix everything, but because this was how I would rebuild, on the truth, not the illusion. On the real, imperfect memory of a woman who couldn't say the words out loud, but who had tried every single day to show me she loved me in the only way she knew how, and now I would speak the rest for both of us. The house was full again. Sam arrived first, then Mason and his wife, and finally Leah, who brought over a tray of food like we were having just another family dinner instead of the conversation that might split us open. No one talked much at first, just the clatter of dishes being set down, the shuffle of chairs pulled away from the table. Hazel colored quietly in the corner, and Sam's oldest, Emily, sat cross-legged on the floor, pretending not to listen. But even the kids could feel it, something in the air, thick and charged like the hush before a storm. I'd set Mom's folder in the center of the table. Everyone glanced at it. No one touched it. "So," Mason said finally, folding his hands, "are we doing this?" Leah looked at me. I nodded. "We are." Sam exhaled. Okay. I took a breath. Before we begin, I just want to say, I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here because I found pieces of Mom none of us got to see while she was alive, and I think they're worth sharing. What kind of pieces? Mason asked warily. Her writing, I said. Personal essays, observations, confessions even. She was more self-aware than we ever gave her credit for. Mason leaned back. So what? She left you some private journals, and now you want to... What? Redeem her? Reframe our childhood? No, I said evenly. I want us to understand her, and ourselves. He scoffed. Maybe some things don't need to be understood. Leah cut in, voice sharp but not cruel. That's easy to say, when you were the one she leaned on the least. Mason blinked, surprised. I mean it, she continued. You didn't get the pressure Claire did, or the neediness I got. You got distance, which sounds like a punishment until you realize it meant freedom. That's not fair, he said. No, I said, it's true. And this isn't about fairness, it's about truth. I opened the folder, my fingers trembling slightly, and pulled out the essay I'd chosen to start with. The mistake I made with my daughters. I read aloud. I didn't look up until I'd finished. The room was silent. Mason cleared his throat. She never said any of that to me. She didn't say it to me either, I said softly. She wrote it, because she didn't know how to say it. Sam looked down at the table. She was always better at showing than telling, but even her way of showing was filtered. Leah nodded. Controlled. Exactly, I said. And I think that's why we've all been stuck, trying to define our relationship with her based on fragments. I reached for another page. She wrote about each of us, not to flatter us, but to understand who we were to her and who she wished she could have been. I read again. This time the essay was about Sam, about how she admired his steadiness but feared he had inherited her emotional detachment, how she'd hoped he would become the kind of father she struggled to be as a mother. Sam's eyes glistened by the end of it. She always said she trusted me to handle things, but that's not the same as saying she needed me. No, I said gently, but she did. She just didn't know how to say need without tasting shame. Then I handed Mason an essay titled, The Child I Missed While He Was Right, in front of me. He read it silently, his jaw clenched. We waited. After a moment, he folded the paper in half, then unfolded it, smoothing the crease. I didn't know she thought about me like this, he said. She always acted like I was fine, like I didn't need anything. She says in that one, I pointed to the page, that she mistook your independence for confidence, that she assumed silence meant peace. That was her pattern. Mason's wife, quiet until now, touched his arm. You carry everything on your own shoulders. Always have. He didn't argue, just sat there, his shoulders rising and falling slowly. I guess I didn't want to know all this, he said. I had my version of her, and it was simpler than this. I nodded. I get it. But I think we owe it to her, to ourselves, to carry the whole truth, not just the parts that were easy. Leah glanced at me. Why now, Claire? Why share all of this now? I looked around the table. Because I've spent my entire life trying to be the one who fixes everything, and for the first time, I realized I don't have to fix us. I just have to see us, and let you see me. Sam reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I see you, he said. Mason nodded, slowly. Me too. We sat there. The weight of old pain made lighter by its release. No one raised their voice. No one stormed out. No one denied what was right in front of us. That in our own quiet, tangled ways, we'd all been trying to love someone who didn't know how to let herself be fully loved. And we'd failed each other in the process. But maybe that didn't have to be the end of the story. We talked for hours about Mom, about our childhood, about the holidays we faked smiles through, and the ones that, surprisingly, still made us laugh, about how none of us wanted to make the same mistakes with our own children, but how we probably would anyway, because being a parent didn't come with a script. Just a hope you'd get it a little more right than the generation before. At the end of the night, we didn't toast or make declarations, but Mason said before he left, "If you ever do something with her writing, share it, publish it, I think people should know the whole of her, not the tidy version, the real one." And Leah added, "Let them see her flaws, but also her fight." Sam looked at me. "You're the only one who can do that. You're the only one who sees both." I walked them to the door one by one, hugged each of them. When I came back inside, the folder sat where I'd left it. But now it felt different, lighter, shared, not a burden, a beginning. The next morning felt quieter than the ones before, but not the kind of silence that stings. It was the silence that follows a storm finally past, trees still dripping, earth still soft, but the air clear for the first time in days. The kind that lets you breathe again. I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a warm mug, staring out the window at the garden Mom had tended year after year. Now it was wild, growing in directions no one had planned. Somehow, it felt like the perfect metaphor, messy, alive, still reaching. A week had passed since our family sat around that table, reading the truth out loud. Since then, we hadn't all been together again, but the ripple effects were unmistakable. Mason sent me a photo of Mom's favorite scarf he found while going through his garage, something he said he'd thought Leah had taken. Sam called just to ask how I was doing, which we both pretended wasn't unusual. Leah texted me a photo of Hazel holding a dandelion up to the sky, captioned, "She said it's a wish for you." Little gestures, but real, tangible, and they told me more than any apology ever could. That morning I packed up the folder, not because I was finished with it, but because I wasn't going to let it keep me inside these walls any longer. I tucked it in my bag, slid on a sweater, and walked the 2 blocks to Nora's house. She opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been expecting me. "I made scones," she said, stepping aside. "I'm not here for scones." She smiled. "Everyone's always here for scones, even when they don't know it." We sat on her back porch, the trees above us just starting to bloom, the sunlight mild and golden. I laid the folder between us. "I want to do something with it," I said. "Her writing, the essays. I think people need to read them." Nora sipped her tea. "Because they're beautiful?" "Because they're honest," I said. "Because they show that loving your children doesn't mean you always get it right. That silence isn't the same thing as peace. And because someone out there is still sitting in the back row at a funeral, wondering why they were asked to." Nora nodded slowly. "Then you have to tell the truth. Not just hers. Yours, too." I knew she was right. It couldn't just be her story. It had to be mine, too. The daughter who kept showing up, who needed to be seen, who learned to stop performing long enough to finally be real. Later that week, I drafted the beginning of a book proposal. I called it The Back Row. It wasn't flashy, but it felt true. The first chapter was my mother's funeral. The second, the letter. After that, the rest unfolded, my voice woven with hers, her essays paired with the story of how I found them, what they revealed, and how they changed everything. I didn't know if anyone would publish it, but that wasn't the point anymore. Writing it was the point, giving her voice a second life, giving mine a first one. One night, maybe a week later, Leah came by after putting the kids to bed. She brought wine and her laptop and a folder labeled Mom's Garden Plan. We sat at the kitchen table, again, and she showed me the sketches our mother had once made for the backyard. "I want to plant it again," she said, "with Hazel and Emily, not because I think it'll ever look like hers, but because I want it to grow." I looked at the notes, the little stars she'd drawn next to lavender and wild poppies, the smiley face beside Basil, Claire's favorite. She had seen me. "I'll help," I said. We started on Sunday.
We cleared weeds, turned the soil, argued about what should go where. We planted rows of seeds with no idea what would actually take. We laughed more than I expected, got dirt under our nails. Hazel ran through the sprinkler in her clothes. It wasn't tidy, it wasn't planned, but it was alive, and that was enough. Later that day, Sam stopped by, then Mason. Neither had planned to come, but they ended up staying. Sam brought lemonade. Mason brought stories about Mom I'd never heard, how she used to talk to the birds while hanging laundry, how she sang Patsy Cline under her breath when she thought no one was listening. We sat outside as the sun dipped below the trees. "She was complicated," Leah said. "Yeah," Mason agreed, "but maybe so are we." And there was no shame in it anymore. No more pretending we had been the perfect family. We weren't, but we were trying now, together, out loud. The next day I stood alone in the living room, staring at a picture I'd moved to the center of the mantel. Mom, seated on the porch holding a mug, her eyes squinting into sunlight. Not smiling, not posed, just real. Underneath it, I tucked one of her essays in a small frame. "We are never as far apart as we think we are." I hadn't planned to stay in town, but now I wasn't so sure I wanted to leave. Not yet. There was something here now, roots maybe, and not just the ones in the garden. Later that night, I posted the first few paragraphs of the book online, just to see what would happen. The next morning, I woke to messages, dozens of them, then hundreds. This was my mother. I didn't know anyone else felt this way. I was the daughter in the back row too. I cried reading them, not because they were sad, but because they meant the story mattered, that we mattered, my mother, my family, and me. A year later, I stood in the same backyard where we'd planted the new garden. The wild poppies were blooming. It was a warm spring afternoon, and the house looked different now, warmer somehow, lived in again. There were new curtains in the windows, kids' chalk drawings on the patio stones, and a worn bench under the big oak tree where Mom used to sit with her gardening gloves folded in her lap like prayer. We were hosting a family gathering, no occasion, no funeral, no holiday, just us, just because. The air smelled like lemon cake and dirt. Laughter drifted from the kitchen, where Leah and Sam were bickering playfully over how much sugar to put in the lemonade. Mason sat at the picnic table with his daughter in his lap, reading one of Hazel's picture books in a voice deeper than necessary, making her giggle. I stood a little apart, watching, holding a copy of the book that changed everything. The back row. It was real. Published. Read. Shared. It had taken months of revisions, of wrestling with doubt and memory and guilt, of digging into places I never wanted to revisit. But I'd done it. I told the truth, not just about my mother, but about myself, about what it meant to be the one they thought didn't need anything, the one they thought was fine because she never asked for more. The letters, the essays, the story of the funeral, and the letter she left me. I told it all. And to my surprise, people listened. Not because my story was special, but because it was familiar. Too familiar. It turns out there are more of us than I ever imagined. Daughters in the back row, sons too quiet to ask for softness, siblings scattered by silence and survival. I received thousands of messages, people thanking me for saying what they hadn't found the words for yet. People who said the book helped them forgive. Others who said it helped them finally confront what they'd buried. And then there were the ones who said it gave them the courage to come back home. That was the most unexpected part, the community it created. Leah had started a small local support group, the Garden Table, she called it, where women gathered in our backyard once a month to talk about their mothers, their daughters, the pieces of themselves they were still trying to name. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they just sat and pulled weeds. They left flowers on the edge of the garden bed, wrote notes, shared stories. Grief bloomed differently for everyone. Sam started writing too. Just small things, letters he never sent, thoughts he jotted down in a notebook he kept in his car. And Mason started therapy. He didn't tell us directly.
Leah overheard him mention it on a call once, but we knew. And when he looked me in the eye at the last family dinner and said, "I get it now," that was more than enough. The house was still mine, legally. I'd decided to keep it. Not because I needed a place to live. My life in Chicago was still intact, waiting, unfinished. But because I needed a place to return to, a home, a route. I divided my time now, between the city and here, between the old self I'd built on achievements and the new self I was still learning how to carry. It was messy, unbalanced sometimes, but it felt real, and real was the only thing I wanted now. "Claire," Leah's voice called across the yard, "we're out of napkins." I smiled and went inside to grab them. As I passed the hallway, I paused in front of the photo on the wall. Our mother, the candid one I'd moved to the center of the mantel that day. She looked peaceful, like she finally knew she didn't have to control everything to be loved. "Thanks, Mom," I whispered. Back outside, the table was full. Kids eating watermelon, juice running down their chins, Leah pouring lemonade, Sam with his arm slung around Emily, Mason in flip-flops, laughter, voices layered over voices, the sound of life continuing. Hazel tugged at my sleeve. "Can I read your book when I'm older?" I crouched beside her. "Yes," I said, "and if I do it right, maybe you won't need to." She blinked at that, then smiled. "You'll still read it to me though, right?" I hugged her. "Always." As the sun dipped lower, we lit the backyard lanterns. The garden glowed. I sat with a journal on my lap. Not Mom's, but mine now. I wrote about the flowers blooming beside mistakes, about the power of speaking what we once buried, about daughters who don't ask for love, and what happens when someone finally tells them they're already enough. And then, when the gathering began to wind down, I pulled out my phone, opened the social page where I'd first shared Mom's letter, the one that started it all. I hit record. My face appeared on the screen, backlit by the garden lights, my voice steady and sure. "Hi, I'm Claire Delaney. You might know me from the back row." I paused. Let that name breathe. Let it mean what it now meant to me. I used to think being strong meant being silent, that if I just did everything right, I'd be loved, that if I didn't ask for too much, maybe I wouldn't be a burden. Another pause, the sound of crickets rising behind me. But I've learned that silence doesn't protect you, it isolates you. And perfection? It's just a prettier word for fear. The truth is, sometimes the people we love won't see us until we make them look. And sometimes they can't look until we stop hiding. I glanced toward the garden. Have you ever been excluded by the people who were supposed to love you most? What did you do with that pain? I looked into the camera, softer now. Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this one made you feel seen. I ended the video, sat back. The house behind me glowed. The garden bloomed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove my place. I belonged, not because I'd earned it, but because I finally let myself. I was no longer the daughter in the back row. I was home.